Hello, and this is part 3 of 11.4 for the HLIB bio topic on sexual reproduction. The next step, we left off talking about fertilization, and how does that occur? The next step after fertilization, once we have a diploid zygote that's starting to form, the zygote is just a couple or few cells, and then it's going to start developing into a blastocyst. And before it's a blastocyst, it's a morula as well. But the blastocyst is a little bit more developed version of the new baby, right? So the blastocyst is a ball of cells that does continue to divide and develop and specialize into a new organism, right? But before that even happens, it's going to first start to develop into the placenta. That's the outer layer of this blastocyst. Okay, the placenta is really important for nutrient exchange between the mother and the baby. By the way, this is all happening right here in the fallopian tube. Okay, and then eventually the blastocyst does make its way into the uterus, and then it embeds itself into that endometrium, right? The uterine lining that you learned about before. Okay, once it's implanted into the endometrium, remember the important thing there is that the endometrium keeps thickening and supporting the developing blastocyst. Okay, and it's going to support the developing blastocyst by exchanging nutrients with the blastocyst. Okay, so now we've got a new hormone that you do need to know about, especially because it's in the statement. HCG stimulates the ovary to secrete progesterone during pregnancy. Okay, so you already knew that the ovary would start secreting progesterone because remember, the corpus luteum is what's left over after the egg is expelled from the ovary, and the corpus luteum already starts producing some progesterone, right? That's going to help support the developing embryo by thickening the endometrial lining, right? Okay, so now we're going to learn that this blastocyst, right, the embryo, the developing embryo that implants itself into the endometrium, does start to produce this other hormone called HCG. HCG then acts on the ovary to make it continue to increase its levels of progesterone production. Why do we want even higher and more increased levels of progesterone production? If you said it was to continue to thicken and maintain the endometrium and the uterine lining, then you would be correct. Because we do need that progesterone to continue to be produced by the corpus luteum. And remember, the HCG is allowing for that to happen. The HCG is produced by that developing blastocyst, which then becomes an embryo. Once that outer layer of the blastocyst forms the placenta, the placenta is that special organ that starts to develop that does continue to produce its own estrogen and progesterone. Okay, and the progesterone just continues to help that thickening of the endometrial lining and helps promote the exchange of nutrients. Okay, so that's that's the main function of the placenta as well, is to release that progesterone and estrogen and exchange materials between the mother and the baby. Okay, so from the mother to the fetus, all of the nutrients, all the good stuff is going to be transmitted to the baby. Oxygen, water, lipids, glucose, amino acids, vitamins, and minerals and antibodies. But then the opposite direction, what do you think the fetus is going to be having to export and give to the mother? All the bad stuff, all the stuff that has to be exported, right? Like urea, okay? Oh, some water as well, if there's excess water, okay? Carbon dioxide, as well as that HCG hormone. So the developing embryo, we said, the blastocyst is producing HCG over here at this stage, and then as it develops further into a full-on embryo, it's still producing HCG, for the mother and to the mother. Why? So that we can keep maintaining the progesterone levels that are going to keep maintaining the endometrium for good exchange of nutrients and waste products. A little bit more about how the placenta facilitates the exchange of materials between the mother and the fetus is that it does have a rich blood supply. Okay, and these are the fetus's own blood vessels. Okay, so that's the outside of the fetus. Remember, the outer covering is the placenta. Okay, and that's going to allow for greater exchange. Okay, there are few thin membranes that are giving a really short diffusion path for this material. Okay, so this would be the placenta right here. This would be the uterine lining or the endometrium over here. And then there's a space, inner villus space, right, with these chorionic villi. The villi, remember, are always increasing surface area. And why do we want to increase surface area? Remember, the villi are like the finger-like projections that increase surface area. Why do we want to do that? To increase nutrient exchange, right, and waste exchange as well in this case. This intervillous space with a fluid there that's going to allow and aid in the exchange of materials from the mother's blood system and her arteries to the new babies over here with the placenta. Okay, and then the last part about childbirth is that it is mediated or controlled by the positive feedback involving estrogen and oxytocin. So how does this work? Well, if you recall, the progesterone was actually inhibiting estrogen production, right? Because the progesterone needed to be released so that we could maintain the endometrial lining and shut down estrogen production because we don't want new eggs to be released. We don't want ovulation to occur because fertilization occurred. Okay, we're trying to have a baby. So because estrogen, so progesterone towards the end of childbirth, progesterone levels do decrease because it's time to give birth. The baby is ready. Okay, and so because the progesterone levels decrease, that actually causes a spike in the estrogen levels. This spike in estrogen levels is allowed again because there's no more progesterone, lower levels of progesterone being produced. So it initiates that contracting of the muscular wall of the uterus. Okay, and these are the contractions that you know about during childbirth. Okay, these contractions do stimulate these receptors in the brain to release oxytocin. So you just need to know that the contractions are caused by increased estrogen, decreased progesterone, okay, and that the contractions then cause a release of oxytocin from the pituitary gland. Okay, oxytocin stimulates muscle of the uterine wall, and the contractions get more frequent and stronger. And then this is a positive feedback loop because it actually stimulates more oxytocin to be produced and then more contractions. And that's why the frequency continues to increase and the strength continues to increase until childbirth occurs and the baby is brought out of the woman and the placenta is also ejected at that time. Okay, so this slide, final statement. The average 38-week pregnancy in humans can be positioned on a graph showing the correlation between animal size and the development of young at birth for other mammals. So what this is saying is that the adult mammal that is giving birth, their size, their body mass, actually correlates with the gestation period. And so gestation period is how long it takes to give birth. And so as you can see, as the body mass of the adult that's giving birth increases, the gestation period also increases. And this gestation period is correlated with the development of the young at birth. So what does that mean? It means that the larger the body mass of the adult that's giving birth, the more developed the baby will be at birth. So, for example, some mammals actually give birth to a relatively helpless, incompletely developed offspring, okay, versus other mammals that give birth to offspring that can be completely mobile and able to defend themselves.